Gunslinger laid down his guns forever, until a crying girl chained in a barn made him draw again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered porch of the small cabin nestled in the Colorado Rockies, where Tom Brennan sat whittling a piece of pine wood with steady hands that had once been the fastest draw in 3 territories. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and the distant promise of snow, though autumn had barely begun to paint the aspen leaves gold. 5 years. 5 years since he'd hung his gun belt on the wooden peg inside his cabin door. 5 years since he'd sworn never to touch those cold steel companions that had defined his life for so long. The Colt 45. Peacemakers still rested there, gathering dust like forgotten memories, their pearl handles dulled by neglect. Tom had built this life deliberately, far from towns, far from trouble, far from the ghosts that whispered his name in saloons across the West. The wood shaving curled away from his knife blade as he carved, his weathered face bearing the lines of a man who had seen too much death before his 40th birthday. His dark hair, now streaked with premature silver, fell across eyes that had once been as cold as winter steel, but now held the weary warmth of someone seeking redemption in solitude. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing off the granite peaks when the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the mountain silence. Tom's hand stilled on the wood, his muscles tensing with instincts that 5 years of peaceful living hadn't managed to erase. He set down his whittling and stood slowly, his boots creaking against the old planks. The rider who emerged from the pine trees was young, maybe 22, with the eager face of someone who'd heard too many stories and believed them all. His clothes were clean, his horse well-fed, and his gun belt sat awkwardly on his hips like it didn't quite belong there. "You Tom Brennan?" the young man called out, reining in his chestnut mare about 20 feet from the porch. Tom studied him with the careful gaze of a man who'd learned to read trouble in the set of shoulders and the weight of words. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Billy Crawford. I rode up from Denver." The young man's voice carried a tremor of excitement that made Tom's stomach tighten. "Been looking for you for 3 weeks." "Well, you found me." Tom remained standing, his arms crossed. "Now you can turn around and ride back to Denver." Billy dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post Tom had built more for the occasional supply wagon than for visitors like this. "Sir, I got a proposition for you. There's a situation down in Clearwater Valley that—" "No." The word cut through the mountain air like a blade. "But you haven't even heard?" "Don't need to." Tom turned toward his cabin door. "I'm not that man anymore. It's about innocence, Mr. Brennan. Women and children." Tom's hand froze on the door handle. He closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. When he turned back, his face was carved from stone. "There are lawmen for that kind of work, son." Billy's young face flushed. "The law's bought and paid for in Clearwater Valley. Sheriff Morrison takes his orders from Marcus Thornfield, and Thornfield—" He paused, swallowing hard. "Thornfield's got the whole valley scared to death." The name meant nothing to Tom, but the pattern was achingly familiar. He'd seen it in a dozen towns across the frontier. Men with enough money and ruthlessness to build their own kingdoms, with lawmen who looked the other way, and citizens too frightened to speak up. "Find yourself another gun," Tom said quietly. "There's plenty of men looking for that kind of work." "Not like you?" Billy's voice carried a desperate edge. "I've heard the stories, Mr. Brennan. 7 men in Dodge City. The Ramirez gang in El Paso. You're the only one fast enough and good enough to—" "Those stories are about a dead man." Tom's voice was flat, final. "That man died 5 years ago on a dusty street in Tombstone, standing over the body of a 16-year-old boy who thought he was fast enough to make a reputation." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the whisper of wind through pine boughs. Billy's face fell, the eager light in his eyes dimming to something that looked like despair. "Please," he said, and the word cracked like a breaking branch. "There's a girl. There's always a girl." Tom turned away again. "Or a widow, or an orphan, or someone's daughter. The story never changes, son. Find someone else to be your hero." Billy's shoulders sagged, but he didn't remount his horse. Instead, he sat heavily on the porch steps, his head in his hands. "She's only 19, pretty as a sunrise, with eyes like summer sky. Her name's Sarah Mitchell, and she trusted the wrong man." Despite himself, Tom found his steps slowing. Something in the young man's voice, a raw pain that spoke of more than just civic duty, made him pause. What happened? The words escaped before Tom could stop them. Billy looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Thornfield took her. 3 weeks ago. Claims she owes him money for her father's debts, but everyone knows. He swallowed hard. Everyone knows what kind of man he is. What he does to the girls he takes. Tom's jaw tightened. Where's her family? Dead. Her pa died in a mining accident last spring. Her ma passed from fever 2 winters back. Sarah was working at the hotel trying to make ends meet when Thornfield came calling about the debt. The familiar anger began to build in Tom's chest, hot and righteous. He'd spent 5 years trying to bury that anger, to convince himself that the world's injustices were no longer his burden to bear. But some things, some fundamental wrongs, cut deeper than good intentions. She's being held at Thornfield's ranch? Tom heard himself ask. Billy nodded eagerly. The rocking T about 10 miles north of town. But it's not just her, Mr. Brennan. There are others. Girls who've disappeared, families who've been run off their land. Thornfield's building himself an empire and anyone who stands up to him. Billy drew a finger across his throat. Tom stared out at the mountains, his mind wrestling with itself. 5 years of peace. 5 years of quiet mornings and long walks through the forest. 5 years of trying to wash the blood from his hands with honest work and solitude. But in his mind he could see her, 19 years old, pretty as a sunrise, trapped and terrified while good men looked the other way. Why do you care so much about this particular girl? Tom asked quietly. Billy's face reddened but his jaw set with determination. Because I love her. Have since we were children. I was working up the courage to ask her father for her hand when this happened. The confession hung in the mountain air like morning mist. Tom saw himself in this young man's desperation, remembered what it felt like to love someone so completely that their pain became your own. You're not a gunfighter, Tom observed. No, sir, I'm a telegraph operator, but I'll learn. I'll do whatever it takes. You'll get yourself killed. Maybe, but I can't just leave her there. Tom closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the guns hanging inside his cabin door. 5 years of peace, balanced against one girl's life. One girl who was probably crying herself to sleep every night, wondering if anyone cared enough to come for her. When he opened his eyes, Billy was watching him with the desperate hope of a drowning man reaching for a rope. I'll think about it, Tom said finally. It wasn't yes, but it wasn't no, and Billy's face brightened like sunrise breaking over the peaks. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Thank you. As the young man remounted his horse and rode back down the mountain trail, Tom remained on his porch, staring at the place where the rider had disappeared into the trees. The whittled piece of pine lay forgotten at his feet, and the silence of the mountains pressed against him like a living thing. Inside his cabin, 2 guns waited in the gathering dust, patient as death itself. Tom didn't sleep that night. He sat in his wooden chair by the dying embers of his fireplace, staring at the gun belt hanging on the wall. The leather had darkened with age, and the pearl handles of his Colts caught the last flickers of firelight like captured stars. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face Billy had described. 19 years old, pretty as a sunrise with eyes like summer sky. By dawn, his decision was made. The ride to Clearwater Valley took 2 days through mountain passes that grew progressively warmer as he descended toward the high desert. Tom had strapped his gun belt around his waist for the first time in 5 years, and the familiar weight felt both foreign and achingly right, like greeting an old friend who'd changed in your absence. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Justice, picked his way carefully down the rocky trail while Tom's mind cataloged everything Billy had told him. Marcus Thornfield owned the largest ranch in the valley, had the sheriff in his pocket, and apparently made a habit of collecting young women like trophies. It was an old story in a dozen variations, but that didn't make it any less evil. The town of Clearwater sat in a natural bowl surrounded by red rock mesas, its main street dusty and wide in the way of cattle towns. Tom rode in at midday, when the sun was high and the shadows short. He'd learned long ago that arriving in full daylight sent a different message than skulking in after dark. It said you weren't afraid of being seen. The Silver Dollar Saloon stood at the center of town, its bat-wing doors open to catch the desert breeze. Tom tied Justice to the hitching rail and stepped inside, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden floor. The conversations died as he entered, replaced by the kind of heavy silence that follows a gunfighter's reputation. The bartender was a heavy-set man with nervous eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he polished a glass. "What'll it be, stranger?" "Whiskey and information." Tom placed a silver dollar on the scarred wooden bar. "About Marcus Thornfield." The glass slipped from the bartender's hands, shattering on the floor behind the bar. In the mirror above the bottles, Tom could see the other patrons, mostly cowboys and drifters, studying him with the wary attention of men who recognized danger when they saw it. "Mister, I don't know who you are, but—" "Tom Brennan." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Someone's chair scraped against the floor. A poker game in the corner stopped mid-deal. The bartender's face went pale as winter snow. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. Tom ignored the stares, focusing on the bartender. "The rocking tea. How many men does Thornfield keep there?" The bartender's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Finally, an old man at the end of the bar spoke up. His voice was gravelly from years of tobacco and whiskey, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "You're either very brave or very stupid coming here asking questions like that." Tom turned to face him. The old man was maybe 60, with silver hair and the weathered skin of someone who'd spent his life under the desert sun. His clothes were worn but clean, and there was something in his bearing that spoke of better days. "Maybe both," Tom said. "You have an answer for me?" The old man studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Name's Doc Henley. Used to be the town physician before Thornfield decided he didn't like my politics." He gestured to an empty chair at his table. "Sit. We should talk." Tom collected his whiskey and joined the old man, aware that every eye in the saloon was tracking his movement. Doc Henley waited until Tom was seated before speaking again. "Thornfield keeps maybe 15 men at the ranch. Hard cases, most of them. Gunfighters and saddle tramps who don't ask questions as long as the pay's good." The old man's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But that's not what you really want to know, is it? Where does he keep the girls?" Doc Henley's jaw tightened. "There's a barn on the north side of the property. Looks like any other barn from the outside, but—" He paused, his hands clenching into fists on the table. "He's turned it into a prison. Separate stalls, each one locked. The girls, they don't come out much." Tom felt the familiar cold anger settling over him like armor. "How many?" "4, maybe 5. It's hard to say. Girls disappear, new ones arrive. Sarah Mitchell's been there 3 weeks now." The old man's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I delivered that girl when she was born, watched her grow up. She's a good girl, Mr. Brennan. Doesn't deserve what's happening to her." "None of them do." Tom finished his whiskey in one swallow, feeling the burn of cheap liquor down his throat. "What about the law?" Doc Henley laughed bitterly. "Sheriff Morrison? He's been in Thornfield's pocket for 2 years now. Deputized 3 of Thornfield's men, gave them badges and made it all official. They call it keeping the peace. And the townspeople? Scared. Thornfield owns half the businesses in town, holds mortgages on most of the farms. People who speak up tend to have accidents. Their barns burn down, their cattle get sick, their loans get called in early." The old man leaned forward. "But there are a few of us who remember what this town was like before he came. We've been waiting for someone like you." Tom shook his head. "I'm not looking to start a war, I just want to get those girls out. Sometimes getting what you want means starting a war." Doc Henley's voice carried the weight of hard experience. "Thornfield won't just let you walk in and take them. And even if you do get them out, where will they go? He'll hunt them down unless he's not around to do the hunting." Tom finished the thought grimly. The old man nodded. "There's no middle ground here, son. Thornfield's the kind of cancer that has to be cut out completely, or it just spreads." Tom stood, tossing another coin on the table. "I need to see the ranch, get a feel for the layout. I can help with that." Doc Henley rose as well, his joints creaking audibly. "My old horse threw a shoe yesterday. Purely coincidental, you understand, but it means I need to ride out to the rocking tea to check on one of the hands who's been complaining of chest pains." "Convenient. Amazing how these things work out," the old man said with the first smile Tom had seen from him. They rode out together in the early afternoon, Doc Henley keeping up a steady stream of medical observations while Tom memorized the landscape. The rocking tea spread across a natural valley, with the main house sitting on a low rise overlooking the surrounding buildings. Tom counted 2 bunkhouses, a stable, several corrals, and, on the north side, just as Doc Henley had said, a large barn that looked somehow wrong. The barn was too well built for simple storage, with bars on the small windows and what looked like reinforced doors. Even from a distance, Tom could see armed men lounging in whatever shade they could find, their attention focused more on watching the barn than on any ranch duties. "There," Doc Henley said quietly as they approached the main house. "The barn. You can see why the girls don't get much fresh air." Tom's hands tightened on his reins. Somewhere in that building, Sarah Mitchell was waiting for someone to care enough to come for her, waiting for someone to prove that the world still held more good than evil. A man emerged from the main house as they rode into the yard, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confident bearing that came from never having to doubt your own power. His dark hair was perfectly groomed, his clothes expensive, and his smile was the practiced expression of a politician or a snake oil salesman. "Doc Henley," the man called out, "what brings you to my humble ranch?" "Afternoon, Marcus. Jimmy Rodriguez has been complaining of chest pains again. Thought I'd better take a look." Marcus Thornfield's pale eyes shifted to Tom, studying him with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up potential prey. "And your friend?" "Tom Brennan," Tom said simply. If the name meant anything to Thornfield, he didn't show it. His smile remained fixed, polite, and utterly without warmth. "Welcome to the rocking tea, Mr. Brennan. Are you new to our valley? Just passing through? Pity. We could always use another good man." Thornfield's gaze lingered on Tom's gun belt. "You look like a man who knows his way around trouble." "I've seen my share." "I'm sure you have." Thornfield stepped closer, and Tom caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else, something that reminded him of fear and desperation. "Perhaps we could discuss opportunities for employment over dinner sometime." Tom's smile was winter cold. "Thanks, but I don't think we'd have much in common." For just a moment, Thornfield's mask slipped, revealing something ugly and dangerous underneath. Then the practiced smile returned, bright as fresh paint over rust. "Well, if you change your mind, you know where to find me." He turned back to Doc Henley. "Jimmy's in the south bunkhouse. Try not to keep him from his duties too long." As they rode toward the bunkhouse, Tom's eyes never left the barn. Somewhere behind those reinforced walls, a girl named Sarah was crying herself to sleep while good men pretended not to hear. Tonight, Tom decided, tonight those cries would end. The moon was a silver crescent hanging over the rocking T when Tom approached the barn on foot, moving through the shadows like a ghost from his past. He'd left Justice tied in a grove of cottonwoods half a mile away, and spent the last hour studying the guard patterns from the ridge above the ranch. 2 men patrolled the barn's perimeter, one stationed at the main door, another walking a lazy circuit around the building every 15 minutes. Both carried rifles and moved with the casual confidence of men who'd never expected real trouble to find them in this remote valley. Tom waited until the walking guard disappeared around the barn's far corner before making his move. The stationary guard was leaning against the doorframe, smoking a cigarette and gazing up at the stars when Tom's arm slipped around his throat from behind. The man struggled for perhaps 10 seconds before going limp, and Tom lowered him gently to the ground. The barn's interior was worse than he'd imagined. Individual stalls lined both sides of a central corridor, each one fitted with a heavy wooden door and iron bars. The air was thick with the smell of hay and fear, and in the darkness, he could hear the soft sounds of weeping. "Sarah," he whispered into the shadows. A sharp intake of breath came from the third stall on the left. "Who's there?" Tom approached the barred door, his heart breaking at the sight that greeted him. The girl huddled in the corner was indeed pretty as a sunrise, but her beauty was marred by exhaustion and terror. Her blue dress was torn and dirty, her blonde hair tangled, and her summer sky eyes were red from crying. "My name's Tom Brennan. Billy Crawford sent me." Sarah's face transformed, hope blooming like a desert flower after rain. "Billy? Is he all right?" "He's fine, and he's worried sick about you." Tom examined the lock on her door. Heavy iron, but not impossible. "I'm going to get you out of here." Working quickly, Tom used his knife to probe the lock mechanism while Sarah watched with desperate attention. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. "Jake?" a voice called from outside. "You fall asleep out there?" Tom pressed himself against the wall beside the barn door as the second guard entered, rifle in hand. The man had just enough time to register his unconscious partner before Tom struck, delivering a precise blow to the base of his skull. The guard crumpled without a sound. "How many others are there?" Tom asked as he returned to Sarah's stall. "3 girls," she whispered. "Anna's been here the longest, almost 2 months. Maria arrived last week. And there's a girl named Beth who—" Sarah's voice broke. "She's very young, maybe 16. Tom's jaw tightened as he worked on the lock. The mechanism clicked open with a soft sound that seemed as loud as thunder in the enclosed space. Sarah stumbled out of the stall and into his arms, her body shaking with relief and exhaustion. For a moment, Tom allowed himself to hold her, feeling the trust she placed in him like a physical weight. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. She nodded, straightening with visible effort. "I can do whatever I need to do." They freed the other girls quickly. Anna, a dark-haired woman of perhaps 25, who'd been a schoolteacher before Thornfield decided he wanted her. Maria, a Mexican girl who spoke little English but whose gratitude needed no translation. And Beth, who was indeed heartbreakingly young and reminded Tom painfully of why he'd hung up his guns 5 years ago. "There are horses in the stable," Tom whispered as he led them toward the barn door. The sound of multiple riders approaching cut through the night air. Tom cursed silently, recognizing the tactical disaster unfolding around them. Someone had discovered the unconscious guards or perhaps noticed his absence from whatever surveillance they maintained. "Back," he hissed, pushing the girls deeper into the barn. "Find somewhere to hide." The barn door burst open as Marcus Thornfield strode inside, flanked by 6 armed men. Oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the walls, and Thornfield's face was a mask of cold fury. "Well, well," he said, his cultured voice echoing in the confined space. "The famous Tom Brennan. I must admit I'm disappointed. I expected someone more impressive." Tom stepped into the lamplight, his hands loose at his sides. "Let the girls go, Thornfield. Your quarrel is with me." Thornfield laughed, the sound as sharp as breaking glass. "My quarrel? Mr. Brennan, you've misunderstood the situation entirely. These girls aren't prisoners, they're assets. Investments in my future prosperity. They're human beings. They're whatever I say they are." Thornfield's mask slipped again, revealing the monster underneath. "Just as you're about to be a cautionary tale about what happens to men who interfere with my business." The 6 gunmen spread out in a semicircle, their weapons trained on Tom. In the shadows behind him, he could hear Sarah's terrified breathing, and knew that whatever happened next would determine not just his fate, but theirs as well. "Tell me, Mr. Brennan," Thornfield continued, clearly enjoying the moment. "Do you really think one man, even one with your reputation, can stand against 6? The mathematics seem rather unfavorable." Tom's right hand moved almost imperceptibly closer to his gun. "I've beaten worse odds. Perhaps. But this time you have additional motivation to consider." Thornfield gestured, and one of his men grabbed Sarah, pressing a knife to her throat. "Surrender, and I'll make sure the girls die quickly. Resist, and I'll take my time with each of them." The barn fell silent except for the soft hiss of burning oil and Sarah's choked sob. Tom stared into Thornfield's eyes and saw nothing human there, only appetite and cruelty, wearing the mask of civilization. "Your choice, gunfighter," Thornfield said softly. Tom's hand dropped to his gun and the world exploded into violence and thunder. The first shot took the man holding Sarah, Tom's bullet finding its mark before the killer's gun had fully cleared leather. The second and third shots followed so quickly they sounded like echoes, dropping 2 more of Thornfield's men before they could react to the speed of his draw. The remaining 3 gunmen fired almost simultaneously, their bullets splintering wood and shattering lamp glass around Tom as he rolled behind a support beam. Return fire came from the shadows as Tom worked his way through the barn, each shot precise and final. When the gun smoke cleared, 5 men lay dead on the barn floor. Marcus Thornfield cowered behind an overturned feed trough, his expensive clothes torn and his perfect hair disheveled. "Please," he gasped as Tom approached. "I can pay you. Whatever they're paying, I'll double it." Tom holstered his smoking gun and reached down to grab Thornfield by the shirt front. "They're not paying me anything." "Then why? Why risk your life for these nothing girls?" Tom's fist connected with Thornfield's jaw, dropping the man like a sack of grain. "Because someone has to." As Sarah ran into his arms, tears streaming down her face, Tom felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth he'd forgotten existed, a reminder that some fights were worth the cost. But as he held her against him, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling her heart beat against his chest, he knew their troubles were far from over. Word would spread. Other men like Thornfield would come, drawn by the news that Tom Brennan was active again. The mountain cabin and its peaceful morning seemed very far away now. The first light of dawn was painting the eastern mountains pink and gold when Tom helped Sarah down from her horse at the edge of Clearwater. They'd ridden through the night, the 4 rescued girls following close behind, as they put distance between themselves and the rocking T. Doc Henley had met them at a predetermined spot with fresh horses and supplies. His weathered face creased with relief and something that looked like pride. "It's over," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion but filled with wonder. "It's really over." Tom nodded, though his eyes continued scanning the horizon. 5 years of peace had taught him that trouble rarely traveled alone, and killing Marcus Thornfield would bring consequences. But for now, in this moment, 4 women were free who hadn't been free yesterday, and that was enough. Billy Crawford came running down the main street like his boots were on fire, having spotted their approach from his post at the telegraph office. The young man's face was a study in joy and desperation as he reached for Sarah, then stopped short, suddenly uncertain. "Sarah, he began, then fell silent, overwhelmed by the reality of her presence. She looked at him, really looked, taking in his honest face and the love written there as plain as scripture. When she stepped forward and took his hands in hers, Billy's expression transformed into something that made Tom remember why he'd taken those guns down from the wall. "I knew you'd find a way," she said softly. "I never stopped believing." The town was stirring now, people emerging from their homes and businesses to witness the impossible. Marcus Thornfield's reign of terror ending not with negotiation or compromise, but with the kind of direct action they'd thought belonged only to dime novels. Sheriff Morrison appeared at the far end of the street, his hand resting on his gun butt. 3 deputized thugs flanked behind him. Tom's muscles tensed automatically, but Doc Henley stepped forward with surprising authority. "I wouldn't, Morrison," the old physician called out. "Not unless you want to explain to the territorial marshal why you're drawing on the man who just freed 4 kidnapped women from your employer's private prison." The sheriff's face went pale. "Now see here, Doc." "No, you see here." Doc Henley's voice carried the accumulated anger of a good man pushed too far. Half this town witnessed Thornfield's crimes, and the other half suffered from them. You want to make a play for Tom Brennan? You do it knowing every citizen of Clearwater will testify against you when the real law arrives. Morrison looked around at the gathering crowd, reading the mood in their faces. These weren't the cowed, frightened people he'd grown accustomed to intimidating. They were citizens who'd remembered what courage looked like. The sheriff's hand moved away from his gun. "This ain't over, Brennan." "Yes, it is," Tom said quietly. "Walk away, Morrison. Take your badge to another county and start fresh. Because if I see you wearing it tomorrow, I'll assume you're still working for dead men." The sheriff and his deputies melted away like morning mist, and Tom knew they wouldn't be back. Some men were bullies by choice, others by circumstance. Morrison was the latter kind, and with his master dead, he'd find someone else's orders to follow. Anna, Maria, and young Beth were surrounded by townspeople now, relatives who'd thought them lost forever, friends who'd mourned in secret, families offering homes and protection. The barn had held more than captives. It had held the heart of the community, and its liberation was healing wounds Tom hadn't even known existed. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, still holding Billy's hand but looking at Tom with eyes that held something deeper than gratitude. It was a complicated question. Tom felt the pull of his mountain cabin, the promise of returned solitude, and the peace he'd built so carefully. But he also felt the warmth of Sarah's smile, the solid satisfaction of justice served, and the realization that some kinds of peace were worth less than others. "Billy," he said, addressing the young telegraph operator, "you still interested in learning to use that gun?" Billy's face brightened. "Yes, sir. More than ever." "Good. Because this valley's going to need a sheriff, and I think you'd grow into the job just fine." Tom's gaze shifted to Sarah. "That is, if you're planning to stay around these parts." Sarah's cheeks colored prettily, but her voice was steady. "I think I might be. Assuming Billy gets around to asking me properly." Billy turned red as a sunset, but his jaw set with new determination. "Sarah Mitchell, I know this isn't the most romantic setting, but—" "Yes," she interrupted, laughing for the first time since Tom had met her. "Whatever you're about to ask, the answer is yes." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Doc Henley appeared at Tom's elbow with a bottle of whiskey that had somehow materialized from the general store. "So," the old physician said as they watched Billy kiss his bride-to-be in the middle of Main Street, "you thinking of staying around for the wedding?" Tom accepted the bottle and took a careful sip, feeling the burn of good liquor instead of rot gut. "Might be I will. This valley's got good bones. Could be a fine place to settle down. For a gunfighter? For a man." Tom watched Sarah laugh at something Billy whispered in her ear, and felt his own face creasing in an unfamiliar smile. Maybe it's time I learned the difference. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the night's shadows, and warming the faces of people who were learning to hope again. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal and patient, holding their secrets and their peace. But some kinds of peace, Tom reflected, were better when shared. As Sarah caught his eye and smiled, not with the desperate gratitude of a rescued victim, but with the warm affection of a friend who'd become something more, Tom Brennan hung his guns on the sheriff's office wall and picked up the badge that would define his new life. The gunfighter was dead. The lawman and the man had just begun to live. What did you think of Tom Brennan's journey from gunslinger to lawman? Did Sarah and Billy's love story touch your heart the way it did mine? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which moment hit you the hardest, and do you think Tom made the right choice hanging up his guns for good? If you enjoyed this tale of redemption and love in the Old West, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more epic stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me bring you more unforgettable adventures like this one. Until next time, keep believing that even the hardest hearts can find their way back to the light.